Welcome to Arsenal, where the weapons and war machines of military history come to life. Today, we explore the F-86 Sabre over MiG Alley in the Korean War, and the crews and opponents who gave it its reputation. A longer version with fact sheets and photos is available in the print edition on LinkedIn or by email. You can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com. The Sabre pilot catches the first glint of trouble. High over northwest Korea, winter haze hangs over the Yalu River, but that flash of silver against blue is impossible to miss. He eases the F-86's nose up, feeling the jet's swept wings bite into the thin, cold air as the altimeter unwinds past 30,000 feet. The radio is already alive with clipped voices and rising urgency.
Ahead, Soviet-built fighters roll in from the Chinese side of the river, angling down toward a bomber stream that has not yet seen them. The Sabre flight has, and they move almost as one. Throttles slide forward. The cockpit fills with the rising howl of the J-47 engine, and the entire aircraft seems to stretch toward the oncoming attack. At these speeds, closing happens in seconds instead of minutes, leaving little room for second guesses. Contrails twist into white ropes as Sabres and MiGs cross and recross the sky, trading altitude for angles in a three-dimensional knife fight. Tracers slash past the canopy in angry orange lines. The F-86 shudders as its 6 machine guns hammer, empty shell cases streaming away into the slipstream. One MiG breaks hard, trailing smoke as it falls out of the fight, while another flashes past so close that the pilot feels its presence more than he sees it.
Up here, over the stretch of sky the pilots call MiG Alley, the Sabre is still proving whether it was truly the right answer to a new kind of air war. To understand why this machine mattered, it helps to step back from that gunsight view and look at the problem it was built to solve.
The F-86 Sabre was born out of hard lessons learned in the late years of the Second World War and the uneasy peace that followed. Propeller-driven fighters had reached their practical limits trying to chase high-flying bombers, especially when those bombers operated at the edge of their performance envelopes. Early straight-wing jets could outrun many enemies, but they often struggled to maneuver cleanly and stay controllable as they approached the speed of sound. That need only sharpened as the Cold War took shape, and planners began to imagine future raids across oceans and continents. They worried about fleets of fast enemy bombers threatening cities, fleets at sea, and forward bases on distant shores. The answer had to be a jet that could scramble quickly, reach altitude in minutes, and still give its pilot the agility and visibility to dogfight instead of simply making one firing pass and diving away.
Existing designs, such as the straight-wing F-80 and F-84, marked important first steps into the jet age, but they revealed serious limitations near transonic speeds. As they approached that region, shock waves formed on the wings and control surfaces, battering them and robbing the wing of lift when pilots most needed clean response. Flyers reported stiff controls, delayed reactions, and real trouble outmaneuvering newer enemy aircraft that exploited any sluggishness.
Into this mix came the requirement for a frontline day fighter for the newly independent United States Air Force. This jet would have to escort bombers deep into hostile airspace, challenge enemy fighters on equal terms, and operate from rough forward bases rather than pristine rear area runways.
Engineers became convinced that the way forward lay in swept wings that could delay the formation of strong shockwaves and keep the wing lifting cleanly at higher speeds. Changing the wing was far more involved than just drawing it at an angle. A swept planform moved the center of lift, altered how the aircraft handled fuel, and raised questions about landing and takeoff speeds on real frontline runways. Designers had to juggle climb rate, range, stability, and ease of maintenance all at once.
Research captured at the end of the Second World War confirmed that sweep could help. North Americans engineers reworked their original concept around this idea, folding it into a larger rethink of the entire aircraft. A powerful new turbojet promised the thrust they needed, but demanded careful thought about how air would reach it and how the engine would be cooled and supported.
Prototypes emerged from this effort and moved into the dangerous realm of test flying. Pilots pushed the new jet deeper into the high subsonic regime, where earlier aircraft had become difficult to control. They found issues with authority in pitch at high speeds, and reported that the tail needed to respond more cleanly when the jet was near the edge of its envelope. The solution became a key feature of the Sabre, an all-moving tailplane that allowed precise control even as the airflow thickened with shock and turbulence.
Viewed in simple terms, the finished fighter was a single-seat, swept-wing jet for the United States, built primarily for the United States Air Force in the early Cold War. It carried 6 heavy machine guns in the nose and could fly high and fast enough to match the most modern enemy fighters in climb and dash. It was designed to scramble quickly, reach combat altitude in minutes, and still give its pilot enough flexibility to fight rather than just make one pass and leave.
On the ramp, the Sabre makes a compact, purposeful first impression. The nose is dominated by a large circular air intake that feeds the engine buried in the fuselage, giving the aircraft a clean, almost bullet-like profile. Above and behind that opening sits a clear bubble canopy, shaped to give the pilot a wide view forward and to the sides, a lesson driven home by earlier wars where frames and armor blocked too much of the sky.
Climb the ladder, and the cockpit feels tight but carefully organized. The pilot straps into an ejection seat surrounded by an arc of gauges that show airspeed, altitude, engine performance, and fuel state at a glance. To the left, a solid throttle controls the turbojet's thrust with smooth but deliberate movements, while the control stick between the knees connects through hydraulic assist to the ailerons and tail. Inside this single-seat fighter, the pilot is more than just a flyer. In the air, he is also navigator, radio operator, and weapons officer, managing position, communication, and firepower while the landscape and sky stream past. On the ground, a small army of maintainers makes that possible. Crew chiefs oversee daily checks, guiding specialists who inspect the engine, hydraulics, and electrical systems, while armorers tend the gun bays and ammunition feeds in the nose.
Under the skin, major subsystems are arranged to balance performance with maintainability. The turbojet sits low in the fuselage, with the intake duct curving around the cockpit and the exhaust emerging just ahead of the tail surfaces. Fuel tanks lie in the wings and fuselage, and hardpoints allow for external tanks to extend range on long patrols over northern valleys and riverlines. The Sabre's bite comes from 6 heavy machine guns mounted in the nose, each fed by an ammunition belt running from trays packed tightly just behind the intake. For the pilot, that layout means a familiar trigger pull that unleashes a dense stream of fire converging ahead of the aircraft. Later versions add the ability to carry bombs or rockets on underwing pylons, turning the fighter into a capable strike platform when missions call for attacking bridges, supply dumps, or troop concentrations.
On paper, the Sabre offers stable handling and predictable responses across most of its flight envelope. In the cold, gusty air over Korea, reality adds texture to that neat description. Pilots describe how the controls stiffen as speed climbs, demanding firm but measured inputs to avoid over-controlling the jet. High-altitude dogfights mean pulling hard turns in thin air while watching for the first signs of buffet that warn of the edge of controllable flight. Long missions make the jet a physical environment as well as a weapon. Cockpits can be freezing when cruising high over snow-covered hills, or sweltering when descending into lower, warmer layers, and temperature can swing sharply in a single sortie. The constant noise of the engine, the rush of airflow, the rattle of gunfire, and the crackle of radio traffic all wear on concentration. It is a jet that rewards skill and discipline with performance and survival, and punishes carelessness with sudden, unforgiving consequences. From late 1950 onward, many of those missions began the same way. Sabres lifted off heavy with fuel, and sometimes external tanks, then started long climbing turns over mountains that looked close enough to touch. Fuel gauges drew constant attention even before the first contact calls came over the radio. High above, thin white lines marked where earlier flights had already passed and where the main fight would soon unfold.
Typical engagements in MiG Alley unfolded in short, violent bursts. Sabres often flew close escort for B-29 bombers or roamed slightly ahead on sweeps meant to draw out enemy fighters. When radar controllers or sharp-eyed pilots spotted MiGs, both sides began an immediate contest for altitude because the jet that held the height advantage could choose when and how to attack. At the speeds involved, the line between a firing pass and a collision was very thin. Closing rates could be measured in the hundreds of knots, and in the way that wings seemed to snap from one side of a gun sight circle to the other. A trace of extra stick pressure, a tiny misjudgment in timing, and the shot would turn into a near miss or something far worse. Over time, Sabre pilots learned that their jet could meet the MiG on roughly equal terms in speed and climb, while giving them better visibility and more forgiving handling when flown well. Arguments about kill claims and loss figures have continued ever since, but for the people involved, what mattered was simpler. The Sabre gave them a fighting chance to contest the high-altitude arena, instead of watching helplessly as enemy jets roamed above their bombers. Pilots and ground crews came to see the Sabre as a jet that rewarded skill and preparation. They talked about its relatively gentle stall behavior for a swept-wing fighter and its solid roll rate, which allowed quick rolls and defensive maneuvers even when the airframe was moving very fast. The clear bubble canopy, well-arranged cockpit, and responsive controls gave confidence when dogfights tightened into spirals and scissors maneuvers where decisions had to be made in heartbeats. The Sabre's weaknesses were just as real and could not be ignored. Range was a constant constraint, especially on MiG Alley missions that demanded long transit legs at high power settings, with a reserve left over for combat and the return trip. Pilots had to balance aggression with the hard fact that fuel gauges were always moving in one direction. Many remembered watching the needles closely, while still trying to keep eyes outside for threats. Harsh Korean winters also exposed the limits of both machine and human endurance. Ground crews fought icing on wings and control surfaces, hydraulic leaks in the cold, and engine wear on open, wind-swept ramps where tools numbed fingers in minutes. Keeping Sabres serviceable meant long hours outdoors, bending metal and managing fluids in conditions that could be as punishing as anything in the sky. They were the difference between a squadron that could make its launch times and one that fell behind the pace of the war. Enemy pilots were quick to test and exploit what they believed were their advantages. MiG-15 drivers often tried to fight in the vertical, using strong climb performance to disengage when caught at a disadvantage and regroup at higher altitude. They also favored tactics that pulled Sabres closer to the river line, where political limits on crossing into certain airspace could constrain pursuit. In response, Sabre squadrons refined their own doctrine and training. They emphasized teamwork, with elements flying in mutual support rather than chasing individual kills into dangerous situations. Positional awareness became a constant theme in debriefings as pilots studied where they and their wingmen had been in each engagement. Discipline in firing helped them make the most of their ammunition and their weapon system strengths, avoiding low-probability shots that exposed them to unnecessary return fire. The Sabre that first entered combat over Korea was only the beginning of a family of related jets. Early F-86A models set the basic pattern with swept wings, 6 nose-mounted machine guns, and day fighter systems tuned for visual combat at high altitude. As units sent back reports on what worked and what did not, later F-86E and F-86F variants refined control systems and engine power.
Experience in combat and in training also shaped armament and mission profiles. Some versions experimented with cannon armament in place of or alongside machine guns, reflecting ongoing debates about the best mix of rate of fire, projectile weight, and reliability. The ability to carry bombs and rockets on underwing pylons turned the Sabre into a true fighter bomber when commanders needed strikes against ground targets.
Beyond the United States Air Force that first fielded it, the Sabre design spread widely. License-built and derivative versions served in Allied air forces across Europe, Asia, and other regions, often under local designations and with homegrown modifications. Some countries upgraded avionics, radar gun sights, and engines as new technology arrived, extending the life of the basic design well beyond its first decade. Naval relatives took similar aerodynamic ideas onto carrier decks, with strengthened structures and different layouts to handle catapults and arrested landings.
The Sabre's legacy runs forward through both the hardware that followed and the ideas that shaped later air combat. Lessons from MiG Alley about energy management, mutual support, and the importance of seeing the opponent clearly found their way into training programs around the world. Tactics manuals and fighter schools used Sabre versus MiG engagements to explain concepts like boom and zoom attacks, bracket maneuvers, and how pairs or fours of fighters could support each other.
Physically, the aircraft survives in many places. Visitors to large air museums can walk beneath those swept wings, stand in front of the circular nose intake, and peer into cockpits that once climbed into thin, hostile air over Korea. Gate guard displays on bases and memorials often feature Sabres raised on pylons, catching the light much as they once did above cold valleys.
The Sabre's story also lives in photographs, gun camera films, and interviews with pilots, maintainers, and former opponents. Collections of images and footage, including those built up by trackpads, allow modern students of airpower to study the aircraft as a working machine on crowded flight lines and in crowded skies.
For those who want to go deeper, it sits alongside other dispatch features and trackpads collections that explore the same period from different angles, from medals awarded on the ground to quiet maintenance victories in icy revetments. Behind every machine like this stand the crews, maintainers, and opponents whose lives turned on how it performed when it mattered most.